What's happening, fellers? We got a special project this video. This might be a multi-part video depending on how far my buddy wants to get into it. But this here is a bunch of loud, barky bark dogs. But this here is a 1964 Ford Thunderbird. Woo! And I've never ever even seen one of these things in the real life, much less touched one and worked on one, so this is pretty cool. Kinda on the honored side to get to work on something so old and neat and clean. The car seems to be pretty rust free so far. It looks really nice. Wait till I show you in the power barn. That's where we're going to be working here first thing. But just have a look onto it. We have just never seen such vintage luxury on this channel. But this thing is sweet, boys. Look on into the trunk of it though. When I'm talking about being free on the rusties, fellers. And you know they say every trunk tells a story. Well, this is one of those. This trunk tells the story of being wet. See, as it turns out, these old Thunderbirds have like, you know the drainage vintage you have in the front that lets the rainwater come in and it drains out? Apparently these have that in the back too. And there's like little drain tubes. You probably can't see because there's not enough light, but there's like a little tube there, and there's really not much of a tube there. So that's one issue we got to try to figure out. It doesn't, the water hits the vents and then it comes down and it hits the trunk and it doesn't go out, it goes in the trunk. But despite all that, the trunk looks really nice. It seems to have the undercooting on the upper. That's a good idea. Have you ever seen the doors on one of these things? She's a mile thick. Oh, and the way that big heavy thing opens is amazing. Look at the interiors. Are you guys nervous to be in there? 'Cause I am. I've just never ever even seen what the inside of a 64 Thunderbird looks like. And holy is it neat. A whole bunch of buttons and doodads and digicals. I don't know what any of them do. I wonder if any of them work. Not a surprising amount of play in the steering. And the fuzzy dice? Oh yeah, the fuzzy dice fit the situation. But anyway, too scared to be in there right now. Let's check out the power barn. The hood and the trunk on this thing are incredibly heavy. I'm amazed that the hinges hold it up when you get it up. Just sink your eyes into the originalage under here. Not only have I never worked on something that's this old and clean, not all rusty and crusty, but I've never been around something that's this old and has this much of the original equipment. It looks like everything's just kind of been maintained on over the years and not like things have been hacked apart and changed and put back, and you know how cars usually look by the time we get them. It almost seems like every single vacuum line is still here. I bet some of those leak. Pretty sure this is going to be a points in condenser setup. I noticed that most of the stuff under the hood of this old Ford matches some of the stuff under the hood of my old Ford truck, so that's good. We got the same starter solenoid down there. We got the same coil. I see a voltage regulator over there. So I reckon we got the same Gen 1 alternator wherever that whirly boy is. See down here? Nope, power steering. Holy jeez, what a fat AC compressor. I wonder if that works. But yeah, like nothing I've ever seen, but incredibly familiar at the same time. Look at the master cylinder back here. Looks like a mason jar. Might be a pickle in there. And this is a power steering reservoir that actually has a filter in the reservoir, so that's interesting. But anywho, about getting into what I'm actually doing with this thing, they have been working on the car and trying to get it going and driving and whatnot, and he said he's got to the point where they had the carburetor rebuilt, they've put a gas tank in it, or it already had a new tank in it. Either way, the tank looks new and fresh, and it's had the fuel system cleaned out, and they've done ignition work to it. Like that's a new coil, I believe, new rotor and all that in the distributor. I think they put new points in it. I believe they've had the car like started and running, but they had some electrical issues. Last time they tried to start it, the wires just got really hot and it didn't go cranky crank. So we're going to look into that. That's probably the first thing we'll do, is pop the battery out, start cleaning every ground on the whole situation, maybe add 2 or 4, and then from there the next step of the way is, you know, they've got it like started and running and they've put it in gear and they said it moved forward and back. However, there's no brakes. Big surprise. But they said the master cylinder and the power steering was completely empty when they got it. I think the oil may have been empty too, but they gave it an oil change. It's had trans fluid in it. The trans fluid doesn't look burnt and it looks all red, so that's a good sign. Maybe, you know, it's old school, probably automatic without the overdrive like I have in my old truck. Those seem to just last forever unless you try really hard for them not to. But anywho, we're going to get to the electricals, get it started and running, and I've already got into the master cylinder. It was really not good looking inside there. Not horrible, falling apart rust, but there was a healthy amount of sludge in the bottom. Pss, pss, pss. With the brake clean down in there, cleaned all that out and added some fluid to it. So while we're working on getting it running, we'll get to look for all the brake fluid leaks. At least she's on a concrete floor. It'll help us pinpoint the situation. That's nice. I do love that. It sucks when you're working on it outside and you get a new leak. It just hits the ground soaks it up, you don't even know. So that is really convenient. I've also added power steering fluid to it. This is such a neat little reservoir. This thing has a big spring underneath it, and you gotta like hold down on the cap while you take the wing nut off, and then there's a filter, cartridge style filter in there that the spring is pushing down on and holding tension to keep the filter seated. So that's cool. Whole bunch of vintagey stuff, not much older than what I usually work on, but I've never really seen onto it. And the radiator. She seems to be original. So I'm sure we're not going to experience any leaks or any issues with that, and that'll be fine. Right. Now we've got our battery pulled out, and we're working on our grounding situation. I've taken this cable completely loose. It was bolted in to the frame slash body right there. Looks like everything's metal, so the frame rail, yeah, and they're all like molded together, so the part it's bolted to is like body and frame. It makes a connection there, and it runs back over to the block. This wire was like up above the power wire and close to that manifold, so we're going to route it down underneath and tie it down where it's not so close to the exhaust. That had the sheathing on the wire all cracked up and fell apart everywhere, so I cleaned up our 3 points of contact really well and started from one end to the other with the electro-digital tape. And you can see down here where I'm cleaning up on my connecting spot on the frame. We're also cleaned up on where we connect to the engine block down there. But you can see all this white paint underneath here. That came up when I went across with my soft bristle brush. So I do believe when we get this thing fired up and pulled out and pressure washed, I think the whole engine bay is going to change colors and go from black to white. But, you know, it'll be nice. It'll be clean. See down in, you may be able to see down in there how bad all the gunky gunk buildup is. We'll get this thing pulled out, take the battery back out of it, and we'll completely wrap up in plastic our fuel make it happener and our electro-digital device charger, because neither one of those things care to be soaked with pressure washer water, and we're going to get everything else way, way cleaner. It's really not bad for as old as it is, but it's a gunky, nasty mess. And then back to the grounding situation. I've cleaned up those points. We're going to put that wire back in. And I also could see that back here there's no ground from the top of the motor to the firewall like there is on most vehicles, so I'm adding one to there. We're pulling out a bolt from our shifter throttle making happener bracket and cleaning that spot off, and we're going to have a black wire tying it to a bolt on the firewall. Look at us. We're even using black wire for grounds. Might even use red for power. I'm just making these up real quick. Solder a connector on, a little bit of heat shrink, and then all the electricity in the car, because she got a lot of electronics, but all the electricity in the car that's being spent all over the place that's grounded back to the body, it's got more paths back to the battery instead of only having the one spot, because I believe that's going to be most of the issues that we're having with the them trying to start it not starting, and the wires getting really hot and starting to melt. All right, now we've got us another ground wire back there, grounding engine to firewall. Over here, we've got our main body and engine ground put back in place. Took this end apart, cleaned up on it. Same thing over here with the positive pixie side. We took this apart, cleaned everything up really nice. And on the starter solenoid down here, these connections are a lot cleaner now, and we had an issue with this bottom one. I have this wire coming over the corner of the battery tray now because there's still enough room for the battery to sit there. And the angle, this wire is a little too short, but the angle that red wire was coming up and hitting the starter solenoid was causing for it to be pulling it loose, and it had a bunch of tension on it. So I took that off, cleaned it up. It's routed up over the top, so now it's hitting that stud at an even 90 degrees. and it mounts up a lot better. And over here, I've got the power wire tied over to the side, up against my where my grounds are anchored over here. Put a little piece of rubber hose in between the two just in case, because it's positive and ground right next to each other, you know. And I've got that zip tied there to take the tension off of up here, and it's also holding it further away from the hot exhaust manifold there, because they were in close quarters before. But now that we got the main bit of the electrodigitals all cleaned up again, let's go ahead and put the battery back in it. Now, if they hadn't had already had this thing running before they got it over here to me, then I wouldn't be putting the battery back in yet. I'd be pulling the valve covers off. But since they've already had it started and running, I shouldn't have to worry about a stuck valve, and we can just go ahead and put the battery to it. You really got to think about that on your old motors, especially ones like this, because this is a 390 FE, and they are notorious for the bent push rods, valves getting hung. I think it has something to do with the severe angle that the push rod sits in the motor. But anywho, being as they've already had it running, we'll leave the valve covers on for now. Now it's about time to get in it and twist the ignition key and see what lights come on and things happen. Maybe it'll just start right up. Whole ignition and fuel system has been good. Should be fine. We learn that she cranks in the ignition on position. I've had this happen to me before, so I'll just have to think on that and look into why she does that. That might be an ignition switch issue. Could even be something's not wired right over here at their starter solenoid. Okay, so from here, I've unhooked the wire, what is getting power every time we put the key into the run position, and then I tested and I seen I do have a little voltage at the coil when the key is in the run position, even though it's only like 5.5 volts, so that's probably not good enough. But I've got my remote starter guy hooked up. We're going to turn the key to run and see if maybe it pops off at all. Here's a hint on the smoky side. I noticed while I had it running, after I finally figured out how to unset the choke, I noticed that it's leaking pretty bad vacuum leak all along here where the carburetor meets up to that, whatever that is, spacer, part of the intake there. So that might have a little bit to do with why it runs the way it does. It's not real bad, but it's not real good either. She does run though, so that's cool. But it definitely sounds like there's a bit of a misfire going on. It may all just be because of that leaking gasket there. Not a lot of lights in here, but the oil pressure was showing, the fuel gauge works, and the temp was coming up. The oil pressure was a little on the low side, but not real low. And we need to put the power meter device on the battery and see what it says while it's running. Might just start right up now, right? You wanna show me some voltage. Come on now. Oh. Well then. All right. Never mind then. Hey, here we are, the following day, and now we're all set up and ready for our power washing. I know. I'm excited too. Here under the hood, I've wrapped up the fuel making happener, the distributors, the starting solenoid, the alternators, and I removed the coil and the digitizer and majigga thinger for the alternator, the regulator. I removed the regulator and taped up its connection for that guy. So we got enough electrical problems already, fellers, without soaking the everything. So now that we got all those things covered, we can take our foamy engine degreaser, soak everything down real good, and fire up the power wash time lapse. Alright, now we're all clean under the hood and most of the way underneath the whole car. Still gotta like get to a washy waxy detail-y on the outside of it. But look at the differences. There's a lot of exposed white paint now. But deep down in there, that was all really thick, covered with mucky goo, and that is a lot cleaner now. That'll make it a lot better to be working on. I took my leaf blower over here. This intake manifold really holds on the water puddles, so I blew all that out. That dispersed the water pretty quick. Look at all the white over here. So this thing used to be completely white all around the motor under the hood. and then somebody just attacked it with the black spray paint can. But you can tell they didn't really prep anything because most of the black spray paint has come off. Especially down here. This entire area is completely white again. See the cross member front core support guy? Yeah. And all along that frame rail piece here, this was all really nasty. And now it's less nasty. All clean around our mason jar. Anyway, now we'll take all the plastics off, let it dry a bit, and put everything back together and run it for a while. Alright. Now I've got all my plastic off and all our electro-digital bits reassembled. Now we'll go ahead and start it up again and let it run for a good 10-15 minutes since the coolant system seems to be doing well. Keeping an eye on that, of course. That about wraps up our first video here of getting the old 64 Thunderbird back on the road. And the next one, first thing, we'll be getting back under the hood here and tackling our no alternator charging situation. And as soon as we have that worked out, we'll be digging into the brakes, which will be pretty fun, honestly. I kind of like the old school drum brakes, and I've never worked on anything that has them on the front end. So that should be pretty cool. I wonder how many years it's been since these wheels came off. That shouldn't be a problem. Anyway, thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe. There's going to be at least 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't really know, couple more videos on this cool old car. Y'all have a good day now.